Cahill.
Pardon?
Many
you
minutes.
can have 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Thank you very much, Cahill. And I welcome this debate. And like Deputy Conway Walsh, I want to compliment our Cahill, Deputy Fergus O'Dowd, on his work on the committee, along with Deputy Walsh and all our other colleagues on the committee as well. There's one word that I would use about the Good Friday Agreement. It has been transformative. As a person who grew up in a border community, as a person who was a public representative prior to the Good Friday Agreement during the era of the Troubles, and a person who thankfully is still a public representative of that area, I have to say it has been transformative. Many's the night on my way home from doing clinics within my own constituency when I travel through County Fermanagh, as I have to travel across the border to visit parts of my own constituency. I was delayed and held up at checkpoints, etc., arriving late for meetings, arriving late home. It was an era that thankfully is consigned to history. And thankfully, as Cahill said today, there's a generation on this island today know nothing about it. But it's important that we know that it existed. But it's important there's a generation that didn't live through it. And there are many people to be thanked. And the Good Friday Agreement has really been transformative for our island, and not just for our island, but for Britain and Ireland, and for the relationships between both islands. We witnessed during that era known as the Troubles, we witnessed so much thuggery, criminality, loss of life. There were so many innocent people who lost their lives through the criminality and vile actions of some members of the British State Forces and some members of paramilitary organisations. And it was deplorable what had happened. Thankfully, our island is an island of peace. The Minister referred to some of the Taoiseach speaking at the anniversary of the Dublin Monaghan bombings back there on the 17th of May. 49 years have elapsed. The British government have not cooperated in ensuring that we would have a meaningful investigation into those Dublin Monaghan bombings. And this House in 2008, 11 and 16 unanimously passed motions asking the British government to give access to an independent international legal person, access to all papers and files pertaining to the Dublin Monaghan bombings. And it's reprehensible that the government of a neighbouring country does not respond to the request of a sovereign parliament. It's absolutely reprehensible. Last December, on the 28th of December, I, along with other local public representatives, attended the 50th anniversary in Belturbet of the bombing of the bombing in Belturbet 50 years ago, which resulted in the killing of two innocent teenagers, Geraldine O'Reilly from Belturbet and Patrick Stanley from Claren, County Offaly. Only last Friday, the Oireachtas Cavan County Council, Councillor John Paul Feely and Councillor Anya Smith and myself accompanied on Taoiseach, where Taoiseach placed a wreath at the location where those two young people lost their lives. The Taoiseach placed a wreath and we said a prayer in memory of those victims and all other victims. And again, I have campaigned over many decades with families, as other members of this House have, seeking the truth and seeking justice for families who lost loved ones and where the truth has never been established into who carried out those atrocities. And again, reference was made to the British Legacy Bill. It's absolutely deplorable that a parliamentary democracy would come up with such a piece of legislation. We heard it several times in our committee that some tin pot regime in South America, if they came up with that type of legislation, the whole of Western Europe would be jumping up and down condemning such proposal by any government. That's what we have to do with the British government in regard to this legislation. It's deplorable that it's still before the House of Lords, and the government have repeatedly stated their total opposition to it, as has every other political party on this island. And it's not that often that every political party on this island, north and south, is ad idem on the same subject. Could I just say, with regard to the work, as has been said, we heard from many of the key architects of the Good Friday Agreement, including Bertie Ahern, US Senator George Mitchell, Martin Manzer, Jonathan Powell, Mark Durkin and John Major. In our engagement, the committee sought to understand how the agreement was reached and implemented, as well as learning from the direct perspectives of those involved. Again, the committee urges repeatedly the political parties in Northern Ireland to return to power sharing as soon as possible. We need government by the local elected people in Northern Ireland. And every day that that's delayed is a bad day for Northern Ireland and a bad day for this island. The British and Irish governments, as co-guarantors of the agreement, must continue, as they have, to strongly support efforts in this regard. Again, the committee calls for a renewed focus on reconciliation. It is clear that while the Good Friday Agreement succeeded in ending violence, progress is still needed if we are to truly secure a lasting peace and a shared society. Victims of the legacy of the Troubles must be central to efforts at reconciliation. And again, I want to compliment the work of Wave Trauma and other groups who work with victims of the Troubles over the years, and families who have never got justice, and people who are still suffering and grieving. I have to say that we had good engagement as well with John Major, the former British Prime Minister, and also with John Bruton, the former Taoiseach, and they shared their experiences the years leading up to the agreement. And again, it was emphasised, particularly by Mr Major, that the personal relationship between himself and the late Albert Reynolds as Taoiseach and Mr Major as Prime Minister was key to ensuring that we secured the signing of the Downing Street Declaration on the 15th of December 1993. That was a key milestone in reaching the Good Friday Agreement as well. And again, it was about personal relationships. And one message that came clear from many of the senior civil servants from both the Department of Foreign Affairs and the Department of Taoiseach, who were involved in all of those negotiations, was that the personal and strong relationships between Irish and British government leaders, between members of the Irish and British governments, and between officials from both jurisdictions was key to ensuring that that progress was made. Were it not for that strong partnership between Ireland and Britain, we would not have had the Good Friday Agreement. And again, repeatedly, witnesses to the committee strongly highlighted the important role of Bertie Ahern and Tony Blair, and particularly their joined-up working and partnership in their drive to secure peace on this island. And again, I would, in the context of the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, I must commend Queen's University on their particular commemoration events. A number of us here in the House had the opportunity to attend those events. They were particularly important. Again, they showed that despite the difficulties that there are, and the Good Friday Agreement has unfortunately not been fully implemented, we're in a totally different space than we were prior to 1998. And we must always remember that. We have the opportunity as well to build on the success of the North-South bodies. I know that Bertie Ahern as Taoiseach and the government at that time were more ambitious in regard to the range of All-Ireland bodies that they wanted to introduce. But again, it was not possible to get unionist agreement and British government agreement on that. But there was always the scope to build into the future All-Ireland bodies, cross-border bodies, and obvious areas for cooperation is education and health. There is a huge amount of cooperation going on as it is across all areas of government, north and south. It may not be in a formalised structure, but there are opportunities to formalise some of that collaboration and cooperation. And again, one of the things that Deputy Conway Walsh referred to was the IBEC report in regard to where they outline the huge progress that has been made in building the All-Ireland economy. That has been achieved without anybody sloganeering or without anybody waving political flags of any dispensation. Again, it was creating the atmosphere that allowed business to get on with their job and create jobs. As a person who lives in a community where our enterprises, by and large, are small enterprises, but they're north-south. Many of the businesses in my constituency in Cavan and Monaghan have sister organisations and maybe part of their enterprises based in Northern Ireland. We've seen the huge development of that facilitated by the Good Friday Agreement. More can be done in that respect. We can build jobs. And again, where there are areas of pockets of deprivation in Northern Ireland, the one way we will make progress in eliminating that disadvantage is by creating more and more job opportunities in those particular communities. And again, an emphasis has to be made on education, because it's very, very disappointing the poor educational attainment rates in some communities in Northern Ireland. I just want to take the opportunity again to say that people must reflect on the progress that has been made. That's never to take away from what needs to be done. And people like Bertie Ahern, who spoke to the committee, they emphasised the opportunities that there are. And he emphasised in particular that we must ensure that our work going forward, that it's victim-centred, and that we put the concerns of victims front and centre in all our deliberation. So again, we must appeal to the British government to withdraw that piece of legislation that's really reprehensible. How could anybody say to families that have campaigned for decades to get to the truth of who murdered their son, daughter, their sibling or their parent, all your work is in vain, because we can, with this legislation, literally wipe away inquests, wipe away any investigations, and murderers can come forward and give themselves an amnesty. That's not justice in any respect and is to be utterly condemned. Thank you, Cathaoirleach.
Thank you, Deputy.